Familiar face for the audience here. We've got Dr. Sal Mercogliano from Campbell University with us today. Sal, thank you for being with us as always.
Good morning. Happy to be with you guys.
Great to have you, and we're talking a little bit about a topic today that kind of employs all of your areas of expertise. We're talking about the logistics of war, and we can talk about that in a historical perspective and as related to the Russia-Ukraine conflict going on right now, because battles and wars are won and hedged on your logistics strategy.
No, you're exactly right. We always talk about the idea that amateurs talk tactics and strategy, whereas professionals talk about logistics. And we're seeing that play out, not just in Russia and Ukraine right now, where the Russians are getting bogged down with a big problem regarding their logistics, but we're also seeing it across the board here in the supply chain, where, you know, if you depend on which article you want to read to today, either things are going to be really good for the supply chain or things are going to be really bad for the supply chain based on the conflict in Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah. So, Sal, in your opinion, what is going on right now there? Why the bog down that is happening for the Russian invasion?
Well, I think it's a couple of things that are going on. Listening to some really great analysts on this. Number one, I don't think the Russians expected the resistance they're getting from Ukraine.
Sure.
It sounds like the Russians basically told their own soldiers, this is going to be, you know, we're going to march in and the Ukrainian government's going to collapse. And therefore, we can keep ourselves on the roads and we're not going to meet resistance. The problem is they are meeting resistance, and they're meeting in resistance in ways they didn't expect. And if you don't properly plan for your logistics, if you go on a trip but you don't properly plan on all the details, then you're doing this on the fly. And that's the problem that they have right now. Because of the nature of the roads there, again, you know, I always use Ukraine. It's like Kansas and Nebraska on steroids. It's huge, flat land, great for growing crops, as we're seeing, but it's also terrible in that you can't get off the roads. You'll get bogged down in those roads. And so they're really road bound. And one of the things that we see the Ukrainians doing is targeting the logistics. They're hitting the fuel trucks, they're hitting the supplies, and that is really causing a lot of problems for the Russians. We also see the fact that the Russians haven't been able to open up the ports along the Black Sea coast. And that's a key thing. The ships will allow them to bring in fuel, ammunition, food, and supplies into these ports. And the fact that the Ukrainians, for example, have held Mariupol, this small little port on the Sea of Azov, have prevented the Russians from sailing ships from the Kerch Strait to Rostov. And that's impacting the Russian ability to get their own crops and exports and imports out.
So I'm interested in this from a historical perspective. Have we seen this type of kind of communal response? And it really truly is this nationalized response by Ukrainian citizens taking up arms, by people deciding to join the military, by women now jumping in and saying, you know, I'm going to fight and I'm also going to take care of people, but I'm also going to walk down the street with a gun on my back to protect my family and my fellow Ukrainians. Have we seen this type of nationalized response to an invasion historically? And has that been one of the reasons for the success in holding those ports and in seeing the targets on the roads?
It's a national mobilization. I mean, Ukraine is fighting a total war. They're using all elements of their society to gear toward this total war against the Russian invaders, whereas Russia is fighting a very limited war. We have not seen Russia, for example, use their full pantheon of weaponry that they have available. We've seen very limited use of the Russian Air Force, although we've seen it and we've seen images of it. Understand, Russia has stockpiles of aircraft and precision weapons. But the Ukrainians are really fighting almost a revolutionary style of war. You almost go back to the French Revolution, where France was besieged by these other nations because they had adopted a revolution. They got rid of their king, they gotten rid of the queen, and they were adopting to become this new republic. The Russians do not like, particularly Vladimir Putin, doesn't like the orientation Ukraine was taking toward the West. It was becoming more European, less Russian. And so he has basically geared this operation to annex land from Ukraine, but also to make sure that the Ukrainian government is not a threat to him, very similar to what was done in Belarus. And so for the Ukrainians, they're fighting for their existential existence. They're fighting for not just their lives, but their existence as Ukrainians. And that is a great motivating factor. And that's one of the reasons why you're seeing such a big defense by the Ukrainians right now.
Yeah, it is quite impressive to watch, if not really, horrific and depressing, and it's difficult to analyze it this way, but it helps us understand things. Looking at the other logistics of war, right, is the response to all from the rest of the world, because you have to be able to continue to run your economy and pump that machine, right? Let's talk about the effects there. And did really Putin underestimate the fact that really the entire world was going to say, forget it, even all these, private companies?
I think Putin assumed there would be sanctions, government-led sanctions would be enacted. I don't think what he envisioned, and to tell you the truth, the really shocking thing is the self-sanctioning. I mean, when you have the container companies, Maersk, Hapag, ONE, and all the major firms self-sanctioning. Remember, the Danish government didn't tell Maersk to do this. NATO didn't tell Maersk to do this. The UN didn't. They're doing this on their own.
Right.
And so this brings a whole new level of sanctions against Russia that we haven't seen before, really in the past, where companies, not just governments, but companies are doing this. And I mean, you had a story that the pilots in the United States, because the U.S. government has been slow to really enact sanctions against the Russian, pilots in U.S. ports are announcing they're not going to take Russian ships. You got longshoremen in U.S. ports and in ports in Great Britain, by the way, that are not going to take Russian ships. Now, the issue you have is what defines a Russian ship. Is it the ownership? Is it the flag? Is it the crew? Russians make up 10% of the world's shipping out there. Are we going to identify Russian ships by their crews? And then the other element that you mentioned here is the impact this is going to have on the globe. Just, knee jerk. 10% of the world's grain comes out of Ukraine, 9% comes out of Russia. You're talking about 1/5 of the world's food supply coming out that's going to be disrupted. Even if the war ends today, you're not getting the winter wheat out. You're going to see chaos in the ports in Ukraine. We're talking about potential food shortages in areas where that food is going to, in Africa, in the Middle East, and in Asia. We're going to see spikes in food costs around the board. And we're already seeing with energy. I mean, one of the big untold stories laying behind the surface here is the rise, not just at our gas pumps, but at the gas pumps for ships. We're looking at bunker fuel over $1,000 a ton. We haven't seen that level of cost in a long time. And typically you handle that by slowing down ships. But if demand is still up, you got to keep the ships moving.
Yeah, slow steaming is not an option.
Absolutely. Sal, and we talk a lot about the civilian casualties on the Ukrainian side, because obviously they're the ones that are being bombarded with ammunition and being bombed right now. But we also have to talk about the civilian casualties on the Russian side from these companies that are deciding to self-sanction, and then the overlasting and ripple effects that it has on the Russian people who most likely don't support what's going on or who have taken up arms in protest against what's going on with the invasion. Can you talk a little bit about those ripple effects of these companies choosing now to stop service, thinking of like Apple refusing to sell its goods or other companies refusing to sell goods and provide services to the people of Russia, and how this is kind of the secondary civilian casualty that when companies make these self-sanctions seem maybe like a good idea or some political posturing, but could also end up hurting people that aren't necessarily directly involved in the conflict.
And this is a great point, Kaylee, because one of the things I always tell people is imagine you wake up in the morning and all of a sudden none of your credit cards work, none of your electric banking works, and what's little money you probably have in your pocket is worth 1,000 times less than it was before. And now go about your day, go to work, go buy your goods, go do everything. That's what the Russian people are experiencing right now. And, one of the purposes of the sanctions was really to target the oligarchs, to target the rich, because, again, Russia is not really a democracy. It's an oligarchy with Putin at the end of it. So that was one of the big focuses. Let's hit the rich. Let's target them. Let's get their yachts. Let's get their homes, their jets. Let's really hurt them. But these sanctions are going right down to the people. And that's going to create a unrest across the Russian people that they're not accustomed to. Again, you got to go back to, pre-end of Cold War Soviet Union for lines. The Russian economy has seen a massive increase over the years. People are accustomed to a different way of life. And now all of a sudden, that's going to be upended. Not to mention the fact that a lot of the industries that they're counting on, I mean, you saw the Nord Stream 2 laid off all its personnel. Well, now you're going to have gas companies, that grain that's being grown in Russia, now it's not going to be able to be exported. It's going to go. And so this is going to have huge repercussions. And again, I would argue it's not even just Russians and Ukrainians that are going to feel this. We're going to feel this in our wallets, in our bank accounts as costs increase. We're seeing it at the fuel pumps right now. We're going to see it in increased food and in inflation across the boards.
And quickly, Sal, I could talk to you about this type of stuff or anything really all day long. It's wonderful information and quite enjoyable, really. Sincerely, but you mentioned, the sanctions and it's hitting the people, and there's a difference the way it's hitting them today than back, when I was growing up, during the Cold War in the 70s and 80s, et cetera. It's completely different now because of the lifestyle, the level of life that they have right now. Another thing that has changed is social media. Talk about the impact of that and how that turned people against this invasion, like instantly, with all of the Twitter that's going on. I get 90% of the information just through Twitter. I mean, you got to weed through some of the stuff there that's BS and some using film or pictures from other wars, et cetera. But you're getting the real sense there, and you're seeing the real stuff that affects and really turns you against that.
Oh, I think, you go back 10 years ago to the Arab Spring, 2011, and that was the Facebook revolution. That was really one of the first times we saw kind of instantaneous. I mean, you've always had media involved. There's always been, whether, it's Thomas Paine writing Common Sense for the American Revolution, or it's somebody with a cell phone right now recording it, or Elon Musk setting up his internet site so that you can have constant internet over Ukraine right now. Obviously, it's a major player. And again, this goes back to that issue of self-sanctioning. We're no longer dependent on governments to make sanctions and, deal with, getting opinion out. I mean, typically you would have the Sunday morning talk shows with all the talking heads out. So to inform people and provide background. Now people are getting it live. And this is an information war. And understand, two of the best countries at information wars are Ukraine and Russia. They've been doing this for over 10 years now, since the Crimean invasion. And both of them are really good at getting their information out and playing it. And Ukraine is showing themselves, obviously, to be much better at it because they have the better imagery. They can show what's happening. And when you see those images, and it's heartbreaking images. I'm a father, and I can't stand to watch kids suffering. And you're seeing entire towns and villages wiped out. And, you would see this in the past, but it would be weeks or months later that you would see it. Now you're seeing it. I sat at home and watched a firefight in front of a nuclear power plant. That is the most dystopian, unreal event I think I've ever watched in my life. And it's very quick to affect world opinion and sway things for the Ukrainians. We have to be careful, but even though the Ukrainians are putting up a great defense, understand that Russia has not brought their full weight to bear on this. And one of the things we've seen continually in this conflict is the Ukrainians, they're winning some small victories here and there, but overall, Russia is a steamroller, and they're slowly, moving over Ukraine.
Sal, I wish we had more time to dive into this. Maybe we can get you on again next week to continue talking about what goes on, especially when it comes to the global economic impacts and how Russia could be fighting, an economic war on top of this physical war, and then what would happen if they do choose to use the full might of their power. But unfortunately, we have to let you go for right now, so hopefully we can get you back on again.
Well, even though it's spring break here with Campbell University, I didn't take the week off to walk around Disney World like some people we know.
Shade to Dooner. Right. Shade to Dooner.
Hey, roll humps, Sal.
Roll humps.
All right, we'll talk to you next time, Sal. Right.